joining us in the Housing in Urban America panel, has government policy stifled many of the persons it was intended to help? Joining us, on the rostrum this morning are our moderator, D. Sam Chandan, who's the director of NYU Stern. The panelists include Lincoln Eccles, Jeremy Farrell, Craig Livingston, Meredith Marshall, the Honorable Mary Waters, and Dewana Williams. They are going to share with us. It's going to be an exciting time. We have some persons who are making their way into the room, but you were here on time, so you're going to get the best from the beginning. Would you please put your hands together and help us receive our moderator for the morning?
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm, again, Sam Chandan, the director of the Chen Institute for Global Real Estate Finance and professor of finance at the NYU Stern School of Business. Delighted to be joined by Councilwoman Mary Waters, Meredith Marshall, Dewana Williams, Lincoln Eccles, and Jeremy Farrell. And we're going to have a very timely discussion on some of the challenges we face in terms of housing affordability in the United States. What are some of the drivers of that, of the affordability challenges that we face in the country, and particularly how they've been exacerbated over the course of the last year by the abrupt increase in interest rates during 2022. That increase in interest rate represented the most abrupt deterioration in housing affordability, homeownership affordability in the United States that we have ever seen in the modern economic era. And for so many Americans, have meant that the idea of ownership has simply moved from being aspirational to being out of reach. That has underlined the challenges that we face in the rental market in the United States, where in spite of headline data showing a slowing of the pace of rent growth, significant new supply coming online, as we'll hear from our panelists, there's extraordinary heterogeneity in terms of that housing market. What we mean by that is that the experience of the most income-constrained families, of people who are looking for housing that affords access to economic opportunity, to education, to healthcare, to public spaces, can be radically different from what we see in some of those headline numbers. So we're going to spend part of this morning exploring what are those things that are really driving the challenges in ensuring access to good quality, affordable housing for every American family. And then importantly, we're going to spend a good part of this morning talking about what some of the solutions are to those challenges. To kick us off, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And Councilwoman Waters, if I can ask you to begin.
All right. Good morning. And thank you so very much for coming out today. It is certainly an honor to be here. I'm Mary Waters, council member at large. That means the entire city of Detroit. Yes, yay to the D. All right, I'm also a former state representative and the first African-American female floor leader in the history of the Michigan House of Representatives, where I was then Governor Whitmer's floor leader at that time. It has been a tremendous challenge for us, and we'll be getting into some of those things in the city of Detroit. You see, the thing that's been happening throughout this country is the fact that we've been putting profit over people. This is not rocket science. We ought to be able to address housing issues. We are not doing our job. Profit over people is what's happening. Yeah, we welcome developers, but their goal is to do what? To make money. And that means those of us who are serving in government, who are public servants, have to make sure that we don't mind working with folks, business people, but we also want to make sure that the community benefits from it. And so that's what drives me, and you'll hear a little bit more shortly. So thank you. Again, I'm Mary Waters.
Thank you. Meredith?
Good morning. I'm Meredith Marshall. I'm managing partner, co-founder of BRP Companies. We're a fully integrated real estate development and investment firm based in New York. We build a lot of workforce housing, ground-up developments in the outer boroughs, Harlem, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, but also Westchester, Long Island. We're in New Jersey, Maryland, Atlanta, and soon to be Florida. We work with a lot of public parties to build large P3, public-private partnerships. We build a lot of affordable housing, workforce housing for the people. And we've been doing so for 20 years. We have a multi-billion-dollar pipeline. Most of our collaborators look like ourselves. We mentor a lot of MWBE firms to be in the business, whether they're architects, engineers, construction companies, brokers, lawyers, and other consultants and partners. And we're here to drive policy because we believe we need to broaden the pie, enlarge the pie, and give us a larger stake in the pie. The need in this country is for about $3 trillion of housing, and most of it's underbuilt in our communities, but we have to do it intentional, with the intention of building for everyone involved and not displacing the existing population. So with that, I'll let Dawana introduce herself, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you all.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I am Dawana Williams, Managing Principal of DeBar Development Partners. We develop market rate and affordable housing. Our focus primarily is on urban communities, with the focus on strengthening communities, strengthening the housing stock, as well as services and amenities in communities. We have mixed-use developments in New York City, Philadelphia, and soon Atlanta, Georgia. We're a bit smaller than my colleague here, but we are mighty.
That's right.
Lincoln?
Good morning. My name's Lincoln Eccles. I'm a legacy owner in Brooklyn, New York. We have 14 units, and I'm here to share my lived experience.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Farrell. I'm the former corporation counsel for the city of Jersey City, and I'm special counsel now at LaFrac and head of their government and community affairs. And we have housing all over the country, and I'm here to talk about the fact that we are seeing, particularly in our urban centers, a set of policies that are based in an adversarial approach to figuring out how we're going to address access. And it's not working, and it's hurting those folks that they are purporting to help. And it's starting to get to a crisis level, and we have to have a frank conversation about why we're continuing to pursue these policies when we've seen them fail and are not taking the appropriate approach, which is working together with the specialists in the space and the leaders in the space and, of course, the stakeholders, which are the renters in the space, and having a conversation about how we can actually do this in a way that makes sense and that is not going to hurt those folks that are benefiting from the housing being provided, as well as the economic opportunities for the folks that have been historically denied access to those opportunities.
So, folks, I want to point out what an incredible diversity of perspectives that we do have on the panel. Folks that, elected officials, folks that have experience working in government, very large, prominent legacy developers, but also critically to have in any type of conversation like this, the perspective of a small owner-operator in the market. And I think what we're going to see is that while very often we think of a multifamily owner-operator investor in the United States as being sort of, that very large institutional participant in the market that may own and operate, the tallest and most notable buildings in the urban core. The vast majority of American renters, live in much, much smaller properties that are independently owned as opposed to institutionally owned. And so in particular from Lincoln, we're going to hear a critically important perspective about some of the challenges we face in the policy environment, how some of the policies that have been enacted over the course of the last couple of years out of a desire to ensure housing security and stability have also made it very challenging to bring new housing opportunity to the market. And again, how it is that we can work collaboratively to address some of those challenges. I think one of the things that everyone has mentioned is that and described is that we are grossly undersupplied in this country in terms of the number of affordably priced or workforce housing units that are available in our communities. There's a lot of supply coming online in the next couple of years, but very little of that is actually intended or directed for the workforce market unless there are specific local policies in place that are designed to ensure that that happens. And Jeremy, if I can ask you to begin, It's a big question, but break it down for us. What in your mind are the 2 or 3 most critical things that are constraining our ability to bring that new affordable and workforce supply onto the marketplace?
I think the number one thing that's impacting us is the failure to recognize that the housing that exists today is going to require constant investment. And so we come up with policies that choke off the viability of current inventory, which just means that we start losing that inventory every cycle. And so we've got to remember that we want our owners to invest in inventory so that it stays in the marketplace. The second biggest constraint is a lot of our urban centers have taken an approach of no development. For whatever reason, development was seen as a bad thing, and we've demonized it, we vilified it, and for no reason. And what we need is a dramatic increase of supply. If you look at what's going on in North Carolina versus what's happening in New York City, North Carolina is going to build almost as many units as New York City is. And that's crazy because we clearly have a larger demand here in New York. So we've got to open access to build. And then the third thing that I think is really impacting supply on affordability is a failure to recognize that affordable housing by policy cannot be the burden of private owners. That is not how markets work. Affordability, for the history that we've really focused on housing in America, was always a government program, and when needed, it partnered with the private sector. That is the model that allows us to meet the demand and the needs. Because, and we'll talk about this as a panel, this wasn't even my idea, I think it was Dewana, it was someone else's idea. The fact is that there is a cost to provide a unit of housing, and that cost has to be met somehow. And if it can't be met and supported by rent, it's got to be supported in some other way. And I'll pass it on.
Dewana, since that came up, do you want to jump in next?
Sure, I'll jump in. So just to backtrack a little bit, I think it's been said, but I think I'll add some data to it. This country is in need of affordable housing. Before the pandemic, we were short approximately 5 million units of affordable housing, units of housing, whether it's affordable or not, excuse me. Post-pandemic, we are short 7 million units of housing. And so the question is, how do we get there? You hear very often from our local mayors or from our state governors goals to reach more housing, to get more housing into the hands of its citizens. Oftentimes it's spoken in terms of affordable housing, and those goals are great. However, we are not meeting that challenge. And the reason we're not meeting that challenge is because, as Jeremy started articulating, there are barriers. Challenges include policies that restrict the way that you can bring that affordable housing to market. Coordination that needs to happen between local, state, and federal government. There's a lack of consistent coordination. And then thirdly, there are barriers that are political in nature. Our electeds have requirements that may not make it possible to bring those units on the market. So those are 3 big challenges. And I think fundamentally what we all need to understand is that affordable housing is subsidized housing, and that's what Jeremy was mentioning. If an apartment or a home is built and it is an affordable home, it has to be subsidized. And the way you pay for it is really only one of 2 ways. Either there has to be another apartment that is not affordable that subsidizes the cost of the affordable apartment, or through a public-private partnership, the government subsidizes the cost of that to build that unit. And so we have to figure out how to better subsidize affordable housing. It's not enough to make a goal. We have to make policies that allow it to happen. We have to have electeds that are in favor of it happening, and we have to have coordination with the federal, state, and local governments.
So, both Jeremy and Dewana have described the critical importance of being able to engage both the private and the public sectors in that collaboration and bringing new housing supply to market. I'll add, and we'll hear a little bit more about this, when we look at the experience of our country over the last 10 or 12 years, it is not just about our not bringing enough new supply online to meet demand. We've actually seen a net decline in the number of affordably and workforce-priced units in this country, in part because of large institutions that have been able able to come in, acquire those properties, and reposition them, for higher up in the income spectrum. So it's not just not bringing net new, it's that we've in fact seen many of the properties that were destined for
historically have been designed to serve the workforce population disappear from that inventory. But given that both Joanna and Jeremy have described the importance of that public-private interface, Councilwoman, can I ask you to talk a little bit about sort of what you see happening on the ground in Detroit and some of the things that you're doing to advance access to and the supply of affordable housing there?
All right. So thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me just say that I think we are kind of missing the mark here. See, the government is willing. This is a situation that is happening right now. That's intentional. It's very deliberate, and it's only happening in the black communities. That's what's going on. We can paint this picture, and so forth. It doesn't matter. And you know what else? In the urban communities, we cannot use the word affordable anymore. It doesn't apply to our communities. We need and we should be demanding income-based housing. Even Martha Fudge herself said, we've got to take a look at the lowest of the lowest incomes. You can't live in the city like Detroit, the poorest and the blackest city in America. You can't do that. You have outside surrounding communities whose income level is about the average of $82,000. Then you have another community, the average income is about $62,000. And then you have Detroit is about average $27,000. And I submit to you that it's probably lower than that. So you're going to decide that our market should be determined by that, the surrounding areas. We can't do that. We are displacing people every single day. So here's what we've done. I recognize that once I got to council, this is actually, I'm going into my second year on city council, and I'm so passionate about it. When I see my people come to city council meetings, sitting there, begging for help, been evicted from their places. You see, we live in a state, too, where a landlord can evict you for no reason. They might just decide they don't like you. They might just decide that they just want their property back. No reason. And it's very difficult to get them to adhere to a certificate of compliance. I know you guys understand all of that part of it. However, so one of the things that I've done, and I'm going to tell you what was really driving me at the time. There was a baby girl. Her name was Kamaya Davis. She was an 11-month-old baby girl who was living in a house because her mom had nowhere else to go. Okay? That 11-month-old baby fell through a crack into a basement of water and feces, and she died. And so that drives me, those kinds of things. And the mom ended up going to prison, but she said, I had nowhere else to go. And those are the kinds of things that we have to care about. So I said to city government, to the mayor, and I says, listen, we've got to do something about this housing crisis. So I'm the architect of a $203 million housing initiative. And that's not even enough. That's just scratching the surface. But it was important to do that just so that we can begin to address the needs of Detroiters. And so what we're doing, first and foremost, I heard somebody mention access to capital and that kind of thing. Well, out of that whole housing initiative committee, we're offering down payment assistance to people to purchase new or used homes. We're offering those kinds of things. Now, we also have what we call a land bank issue. Dewana, you talked about land bank, land trust, So, but here's the thing. The land bank is in the business to turn profit. That's all they do. Currently, they've sold most of the homes in the city, with the exception of about 2,000 of them, right? So we had to halt the sales of bundling homes in order to make sure that people were not out on the streets. We called a press conference. and we halted that sale. There was one developer that came in who had purchased 42 homes. We thought he was going to purchase them until I got involved. 42 homes, which equates to about $25 per home. 26 of those homes were occupied. But he was just going to throw the families out on the streets. I said, we're not having this. We're going to stop this sale. We stopped that sale. Those are the kinds of things that we have to do. We have to protect people. And so guess what? We're going to not only work with those 26 people, we're going to work with the other 1,800, 2,000 people who are trying to have a place to live. And for whoever wants to own a home, we're going to make sure that they have that opportunity. These are the kinds of things that we have to do in order to assist people. We are missing the mark when we talk about all this other stuff. I know that government can do better. They've dropped the ball. They don't want to do better. Now, I'm part of government, right? And I'm fighting every single day to make sure that those things happen. So I also created a one-stop shop, if you will. Any housing initiative that Detroiters have, they'll be able to call one telephone number, whether they want to rent a home, purchase a home, whatever it might be, they'll be able to call that telephone number. And that family resource center is named after, guess who? Kamaya Davis, the little 11-month-old baby who dropped. You know why? Because we must always be reminded. We must never forget that everybody deserves a decent place to live regardless of their income. And that's what's happening now. We're shutting people out who do not have the income. You tell me that's not deliberate. If somebody can show me where that is not deliberate, anybody, because it is, and it's deliberate in our black communities. Income-based housing.
Councilwoman, I just want to jump in there.
Yes.
Because I couldn't agree more. Everybody deserves a decent place to live, and it's something that we have lost sight of because what has happened is an adversarial relationship is being created when it's not an adversarial relationship, and it's so important. I agree with what you say, that government is walking away from this obligation, and that's where we need to come in, and that's why folks like Meredith can talk to us a little bit about what is happening and how he partners.
But let me tell you, when you talk about adversarial, it is, I heard you say that earlier, Jeremy, when you talked about between the residents and the developers and so forth?
No, I mean really between, government and the developers. Usually residents aren't so adversarial.
Because, let me just quickly, and I won't take long, he can take it. I just want to say that there are no true adversarial relationships. The community says, if you want something from us, then we need something from you. You have developers who come in, they're asking for a lot of incentives. So if you're doing that, that means that you've got to take care of the community too. So we cannot, as elected officials, we have to say, this is what we need. If you need something, this is what we need. It is an important working relationship that we must have.
No, and that's exactly right.
Could I jump in?
Yeah.
Because I actually build affordable housing, work with a lot of the political folks, the advocates, and what we have is insufficient tools, all right? So you say that, I hear affordable for whom? And a lot of our community makes less than the AMI because the AMI calculation is the greater metropolitan area and not necessarily a local community. But we're subsidizing housing, we need to be subsidizing people. And what do I mean by that? Section 8 is a potent tool. Section 8 only covers 25% of the eligible households, right? And the cost of that will be about $75 billion. We subsidize home ownership with the mortgage deduction. That's $750 billion a year. You can just haircut that by 10% and solve your issue. It's political failure. It's failure with the advocates and the economists because they can fix it. They don't want to fix it. You're absolutely right. And I build it, right? I design it, and we finance it. But you think even politicians in New York would come to me and say, how can we build 500,000 units of housing? No. They come up with rent regulation, good cause eviction. No, you can't build anything. And who's building now? Black and brown people are finally building. I'm the largest builder in Harlem, Jamaica, Queens, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Jersey City, DC, Atlanta, and soon to be Overtown in the black neighborhoods of Miami, right? And we can't build in New York? We're replicating 30-year tax abatements in Atlanta. The mayor said, how did you do that? I said, we had an as-of-right tax abatement. They're replicating it in Atlanta, and we're taking it away in New York. Why? Because it's the okie doke. They don't want you here, right? So you can't build when it's time for us to build, right? If you look at our building, the brokers are black, the lawyers are black, the architects are black, right? And when I don't build, where do they go? They have to move to Atlanta, the Carolinas, Texas, all these red states, right, are building, and the blue states are not building. So I think it's a lack of policy, lack of tools, and a lack of creativity. But we can solve it if it's a coalition. So we formed a coalition, DeWanna's part of it, Coalition for Workforce Housing. We have unions, black and brown developers, not-for-profits, and some political folks who are willing to engage with us. But we're going to come up with the tools and the solution. Now, if the politicians don't enact it, it's not on us. We're doing the work, but we have to work together, and it can't be in a silo.
So a couple of really key there's a lot to unpack here. A couple of key takeaways. Just one, the critical importance of collaboration across everyone involved at every stage of the development life cycle. There's no one of us at the table who, in isolation, is going to be able to help to improve affordability outcomes. The other, to the councilwoman's point, is that there are many, many different needs in the community. And we should not be so naive as to think that when we're talking about either income-based housing or affordable housing or workforce housing, that there is a single solution to solve what is inevitably a very, very complex challenge for people operating at very different income levels, but also where ultimately it is not just a question of ensuring that housing is affordable, it's ensuring that people have access to secure, stable, safe housing that provides access to all of the critical amenities that help to ensure better health outcomes, give them access to educational opportunity, economic opportunity. A lot of our policies in the country are just designed to ensure that, okay, given your income, you can afford to pay a certain level of rent, but there are so many things that housing provides for you and is a facilitator for beyond just a roof over your head. To some of the points that have been raised, Lincoln, can you jump in for us, because the perspective of the independent landlord in this market is so critical.
Okay, again, I could just tell my personal story. I'm a New York landlord. My family's had property in New York since the early 60s, and our situation is that, like, we see the redlining program that has been replaced by rent stabilization, because they basically have done the same thing, as in it de-invests in our community and brings down the value of our properties. I've had an uncle that was the vanguard for the family. He came in to the U.S. again in the early 60s as a farmhand, and he made his way into New York, and he linked up with some Jewish members of the community and started acquiring property. And he led the way for our family, because his side of the family, they were farmers, but he was a very good businessman. He accumulated about 100 multi-unit properties. We're not talking about single-family homes. We come from Jamaica, and understand my father's side, we're builders, and we understand that wealth creation is multi-unit properties. And New York City, as the family is building up that wealth, the city and the state tacked on rent stabilization, which started crushing us. The earliest memory I have is in a property, 390 Eastern Parkway. My uncle and my father had possession of that building. And a few years ago, we saw, because we lost the property, and we saw a developer refinance that property for over $30-something million. We've had situations where there's a term, warehousing, that is thrown about property owners such as myself warehousing apartments. Well, redlining and rent stabilization forces us to warehouse our properties for large developers, for the big property owners, because we're cash businesses and we're forced to be in a subsistence situation. And again, the family had a pretty decent portfolio in Brooklyn. And I had an aunt have to sell a property in Brooklyn because we were getting out of New York, going to the other states decades ago. And this aunt, she sold a 20-unit building. And 3-4 years later, one of my generation looked back at the property, and we saw that the new owner sold one apartment in this 20-unit building for what my aunt sold the whole building for. Most of the regulations here over-impact minority owners, blacks in particular. I'm a member of SPONY. We're a multi-ethnic organization, every stripe, and we're all now caught up in this. But from what I see, all of this is a continuation of the redlining program, and the squeeze is constantly on. 2019, they put in legislation called HSTPA that basically tanked my economic viability, because I was one of those owners that was giving those discounts to my tenants, really caretaking for them and their economic opportunity. Because I was basically drafted into the property, because I was one of the generation who was like, nah, I don't really want to get into this real estate thing because it's nuts. But the situation was that this particular property that I'm dealing with now, my father had it, transferred it to my mother, and my mother ended up struggling with it. My sister came in, and they were getting threatened by people that were in the property, people that took over, drug dealers we're talking about, that took over units in the property. And I got drafted, is basically what it was. I had to come in, and I'm not Superman, but literally I've had confrontation with weapons in the hallway, fights in front of the building, in the basement, this, that, and the other, having people get arrested, this, that, and the other, to clean up the property. And I bent over backwards to fix up units. 9/11, I'm in the basement here. I was working under Lehman Brothers, and right after 9/11, we ended up here. I had to take my savings from that employment and throw it in the property, because my mother was a New York City school teacher, and she had an entire 14-unit building filled with tenants. Almost no one was paying rent. She had 3 tenants paying rent. And guess what? Right now, I have 3 tenants in a 14-unit building that are consistently paying rent right now. Everybody else is either moving out or struggling, and I'm trying to work with them.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll continue. The bottom line, to reiterate, is that the legislation, it sounds like it's good for tenants, but it's really a setup, because affordable housing is not really affordable. It's not affordable for me. It's destroyed my economic viability, and it makes it extremely difficult for me to provide quality housing to my tenants, because the rents are simply too low to cover the cost of operating the property. My numbers, I need about $1,100 per unit to get by. I have multiple apartments that are $930, $950 a month. So I'm losing on those. I have one that's $480. That's one of those quote unquote warehouse units that because of HSTPA, I can't do anything with. I want to, but the numbers just simply don't add up. And it's crushing me, and it's degrading the quality of housing for my tenants.
Joanna, go ahead.
So I just want to make a quick point. I think one thing that you're hearing here is that we're solving for an array of issues. On the one end, we're talking about housing stability, people that just need a place to live. And as the councilwoman pointed out, in many metropolitan areas, many big cities, the average median income, which is the measurement for what you charge for a quote-unquote affordable apartment, is too high. And so a new standard would be just simply looking at income-based, and and as she's pointing out, and that's totally a viable solution for certain communities where there's better coordination, as I mentioned before, is needed so that people who are not stable and have very low incomes can qualify for apartments, and that there can be some kind of public-private partnership to handle housing insecurity. That is something that needs to be addressed on one end of the spectrum. But also, another end of the spectrum, though, is we don't want people in our community to just be barely surviving. We want people in our community to thrive. We want to build generational wealth like everybody else. And one thing that we're seeing with the impacts of these policies is that they are preventing our community from building generational wealth. And what do I mean when I say that? The councilwoman mentioned, for example, land banks as they have in Detroit. All over the country, there is a push for what's called CLTs, community land trusts. There are also efforts, and community land trusts are these devices where a group of people or nonprofits own your land and rent it, or you make a payment per month to the land trust, and that's how you live. But that simply makes you you're once a homeowner, and now it makes you really a glorified renter. And when you sell your property through the land trust, you can only realize a certain percentage more than you pay for it. My view of that is the advocates that are promoting these efforts around the country should try that in the richer communities. Donate their land and let them be a community land trust and limit their profits. But don't do that with us. We're not guinea pigs. We've been there before. We've done that for centuries, being guinea pigs for others. We need to be advocating for ourselves in our communities, policies that are best for us, be it housing insecurity, be it building generational wealth. I think that when people come and promote these policies, we need to understand that they're not necessarily promoting what's best for our community. And the devil is in the detail, and being really involved with your community boards and understanding who's representing what position I think is really, really important in this matter of housing.
Meredith, I'll come to you in just 1 second. Sir, I apologize that I've kept you waiting. Please go ahead.
Quite all right. Thank you very much for having us here. I'm from Baltimore City, Maryland. My name is Dr. Marvin Cheatham. I'm in the Larry Young chapter. There's a quote in the movie, The Untouchables, and the quote is, "What are you prepared to do?" My question dealing with housing. We are suffering now at 30% in Baltimore City are living in food deserts. That Section 8 deals with one part of housing, but Section 3 also deals with development. Section 3 should include things such as food deserts. And what I'd like to invite all of you to do, to come to Baltimore on the 2nd of September. We're having a major charrette where we're inviting federal, state, and city officials, because none of them live in a food desert. None of them have done anything for 10 years, and our life expectancy is now down to 65 years old, when our white affluent neighborhoods is up to 85 years. We need to address the housing issue, not only to build housing, but why would you build housing and there isn't a food market there? Or the residents that live there don't have transportation to get to a food market. We have food deserts because we are building structures and there's no accessibility to transportation. So I would like to invite you all to come to Baltimore. Federal, city, and state are being invited. Coppin State University, I'm a lifetime alumnus from there, but we would like to have this body and other bodies come, because we know this problem is all around America. You got buildings being built that housed people, but they had no means of getting food.
Yeah. Sir, your points are very well taken. I will join you in Baltimore. Part of my research focuses on this issue of the connection between housing and individual and public health outcomes, and it has everything to do with everything from the food deserts you've described to access to high-quality public spaces. But the housing question is about so much more than just can you afford to live in that particular place. It's all of the amenities or disamenities that housing unit gives you access to. Thank you so much for sharing that. But Meredith, I interrupted you. If you could please jump in.
I think DeWanda wanted to answer that question.
Go ahead, please.
Well, we'll go to Meredith, but I can quickly say I lived in Baltimore for 6 years, and I actually tried to develop there for 3. Again, as I've been mentioning, and I know it's not something everybody has experience with, but there has to be a level of coordination between the city government and the developers. And in the 3 years that we attempted to develop on Druitt Park Lake Drive, and Meredith. Yep. So 601 Druitt Lake, right across from the park, on the corner, Linden Boulevard. There's nothing there. That lot has been there. I went to law school there 25 years ago. That lot has been vacant for 30 years, and we tried for 3 years to develop it recently. Unfortunately, in places like New York City, we have term sheets. We have the ability. There's an infrastructure in place that allows you to develop mixed-use properties. We focus on mixed-use properties. Unfortunately, right now, you don't have that in Maryland, so it starts with the government, and I think that your efforts would go a long way working with the government to establish a possibility for subsidies for mixed-use development. I mean, that's one of the barriers.
I would just say with food deserts, we're actually building a grocery store in West Baltimore near the Egg Avenue Poe Homes. It's called Center West. We got Kevin Durant, Serena, and Venus to invest in a grocery store. It's opening soon. 262 new units, luxury, low-income, and mixed-income housing for the people. Brand new development. You should take a look at that model. It could be replicated. So there are people.
Can we invite you as well?
I'll come down.
If you notice, one thing that Meredith just said was that it's a mixed-use development. I'm going to re-emphasize, if you have one unit that's affordable, you need something else to counterbalance it, and that is why it works. That where they are has also been vacant for 30 years. So the point is that a concentration of poverty is not an economic engine. And I think that we have to keep that in mind because we can't make it work.
There are a lot of questions building up. If you keep it moving.
Oh, wow. Yes, well, I certainly don't want to hold up the comments from the community, but let me just say that, while we work with developers, we also fight for concessions. So I want to make that point. And DeWanda, I just want to also make the point that, regarding the land banks, I mean, that is something that eats away at me. I've got to tell you, because when we did the press conference, we did ask that they be audited, and we also requested an investigation. So all these people who are setting up all of these, I don't know if they have any in Baltimore. You have land banks there or land trusts. We need to audit and investigate every single one of them because they are in for profit. And we just did a major developers with Ross and Related in the city of Detroit. We did that. So we work with them. City council approved it. It was nearly a unanimous vote. So we want all of those positive things to happen. And we want to make sure, somebody mentioned warehousing a little bit earlier, warehousing folks and that kind of thing. I'm just so anti that. I think that we can do better, and we must do better. We went out to Seattle, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago now, and so we visited one neighborhood, and it was mixed use there. We had low income, moderate income, and we had market rate. And everybody was just there in a wonderful, wonderful community. You could not find, they had access to food, those kinds of things, the grocery stores in the area. And it was so extremely clean. You could not find a cigarette butt or anything on the ground. So I know that it can happen in all of our communities in Detroit and Baltimore and so forth. We just have to have a willingness to make that happen.
Let's grab the next
We're going to try
question.
and do a lightning round here to get quickly through as many of these questions and answers as we can. Apologies, Jeremy, I think I might have just interrupted you. Sir, please.
My name is Reverend Conrad Tillard, and I'm with an organization called Black Clergy for Economic Empowerment. And I am enjoying this conversation. And I realize, as a pastor who served in Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Roxbury, and Flatbush, everywhere I've served, I've watched those communities gentrify. So I realize there's a plethora of issues. Renters, I've been in eviction court with folks. But what I'm concerned about right now is people like Lincoln. Because here in New York, and I'm most qualified to speak on the New York scene, we're losing people because our folks who own property are being driven out of this city. And they're being driven out, and this is the elephant in the room, by legislators, many of them who aren't even old enough to own property. We have a city councilman in New York, in Brooklyn, that it's been in the papers recently. He just got his first apartment. And yet these people are making housing policy, and they are painting owners of property with one broad brush, as though this is the Soviet Union, and a poor black person or a recently property acquiring family is the same as a land baron. As we speak right now, the governor has legislation called good cause eviction on her desk. And I've sat with Lincoln. He didn't say it, but he's had to take units of that 14-unit building he's had. He has to take units off the market because these same idealistic legislators are placing burdens on him that he can't keep up with. And so I'm saying to all of us, we need to talk to our elected officials. They need to be concerned about black wealth. We used to talk about black home ownership in the city. We only talk about affordable housing now. We've got black legislators like Kevin Parker, Stephanie Zinnerman, that these young radicals, leftist socialists, are picketing in front of their houses demanding that they support legislation that's going to drive black homeowners out of this city. So we've got to stand up. And this is about ownership, and black homeowners in the metropolitan area are in trouble. So good cause eviction is not what it seems to be. It will not help people in public housing. It does nothing to help people who can't pay their rent. But what it will help is someone that just graduated from Williams College that moves into Lincoln's building and makes his life a nightmare because they don't want a gas stove, they want an electric stove, and I'm sure a lot of other amenities that he can't necessarily afford to produce. So let's be very clear about what this conversation is. Could you speak to that? Thank you.
Yeah, a brief response to the points on good cause eviction?
I would love to just address that very quickly because it starts with the very simple thing that we talked about with Dewana, which is a unit of housing costs a certain amount to provide. And if you can't cover that cost, then the person who owns that unit is going to lose it. And that is true for any owner. And what we've done with policies in a lot of our urban centers is we demonize the owner, and then we enacted these policies that the Reverend talks about as socialist policies. And we have made it impossible for homeowners to continue to own homes and provide housing. And what's worse about all of this is we do it saying that we're trying to help folks. But when we make these policies happen, we actually haven't made it any easier for anybody to get housing. And we've seen that in New York now. For instance, with the expansion of the HSTPA over these last several years, housing has not gotten easier and it has not gotten cheaper. Because the only real thing that makes housing cheaper is either increasing the supply, and therefore there's more to go around and there's no pressure to raise rents, and or partnering with the private sector and building housing that is subsidized so it can be offered to the market at a subsidized rate, or the government providing the housing themselves, as we see with government housing. But the point of the matter is good cause eviction, HSTPA, rent control, rent stabilization, those are efforts to artificially or through government policy change the economic conditions that exist in reality, and it doesn't work. You gotta allow for a housing unit to support itself, or be subsidized in some other way. And that was Dewana's point as
Could I
well.
just say one thing, though? We're getting these draconian policies under our leadership.
Correct.
Aren't we the speaker?
Yeah.
Aren't we the head of the Senate? And we're electing these young black and brown people, and they're ruining our communities. What are we doing? Right? Why can't we go up and say, no, you're not going to do this? We've done it in Albany. There's a lot of pushback, and I don't get it. The same young man you talked about was in my house when he was 1 year old, right? He was with my daughter Naya's birthday party. Unfortunately, his father passed away. He should know better, right? But he doesn't because he's smarter than we are, right? Like you mentioned, Williams College and all this. But it is what it is. We're fighting that battle, and they're winning. I don't know if good cause is going to pass or not. We were up there in Albany, and they have a lot of momentum because if they can't convince you, they confuse you. So that's a nice name, Good Cause. You when you get evicted, it's a good cause. It's a backdoor way to steal your property.
Yes, it is.
Because if you can't make money, then the big guys come and buy it, and then they change the policy again. And guess what? We're on the outside looking in. So, and brother, I think I know you from Roxbury, right? Was it Roxbury or Brooklyn?
If I could add in?
Good seeing you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I have electric stoves for my tenants. Here's the crazy thing with these laws and the insidiousness of the situation, because we on this panel, all of us here, might be focused on positive outcomes. There are people that are hell-bent on undermining any and every attempt that we do to do something sensible. During the pandemic, with all of the horror story I already brought up, my boiler died. And at that moment, there were no boilers I could find. And I called as far as Chicago, Boston, so on and so forth, to find a regular #2 oil boiler. There's nothing in the country for me. So I found a black man that had a company called Block Power. And he came to the rescue. They do heat pumps. That's a green system that uses electricity to heat and cool your property, multi-unit property. The bill, $300,000. This man and his team, we negotiated for months. They took off $100,000. Now, I had the end of the day, the government did come in through Con Edison and take off another $100,000. So now I'm facing a $100,000 bill, which is pretty much the equivalent of the monthly breakdown is the equivalent of what my regular oil and maintenance cost would be. This is a green system. And I got electric stoves in my building now to cater to those people if they want to come in. Right now it's all black. That said, I'm now, because of the legislation that's already out there, facing a rent reduction possibility because Section 8, they don't care that the tenant is getting a discount on their electric usage that is the equivalent of the actual increase in their use, so that their electric bill evens out. There's no extra out-of-pocket costs. All they care about is that the tenant has to pay for their heat directly now. I'm looking at the same thing for the government agency that controls rent-stabilized property, which is mine. They're looking to give me a rent reduction, even though I have this massive bill now. And again, we're talking about a situation where I have 3 tenants that are consistently paying rent. Everybody else is struggling, or I have move-outs where it's a massive turnover cost. The insidiousness of the laws and the regulations, that's what's going to eat us alive. And that young man that was mentioned, the city council member, I've gone to him repeatedly for assistance. Hey, does the city have anything to help me out with? Nothing.
Lincoln, if I could.
I understand, but one last thing. I'm trying to emphasize that a lot of these politicians, they have blackface, but that's not they're not doing the work. They don't represent us. They're cutouts for these new people, gentrifiers into our communities. They're the ones that are voting them in, and they are catering those people. They're the ones that are actually funding their campaigns. I've been on the ground. I've seen it myself. And we're talking about state senators. We're talking about city council members. We're talking about assembly members in New York City. They have the ethnic look, but they are not representing the people in the community.
Sir, please.
Thank you. Greetings. I like to call everybody carbon beings, because I recently found out that the universe is 1, 2, 3. Hydrogen first, that's water, the first element of life. Oxygen and carbon. So we get birth certificates and we call human beings. First, we carbon beings. Now, to quote John Henry Clark, he says, "They see in us a power more powerful than the hydrogen bomb." That relates to all this air. All this air, we hear each other's voices, those are atoms, the unseeable atoms. Our devices, the pictures don't just pop into them from the stations, they travel across the atoms, that is life.
So, yeah, sir, if you could.
And so I'd just like to say, instead of just like cowering and say, oh, they're all on the top, they don't want equality, there's 3 colors that can make them give us what we deserve. You want to hear those 3 colors? Does anybody want to hear those 3 colors? Yes. Okay, they're the colors of the sun, it's orange, and one is earth is green, and Austin the Great lie called Eve, metallic blue, when the sun and the earth evens up together. Those 3 colors, the arc of the universe bend toward justice. We come from the universe. That's why I say we carbon beings. Now, the roof of the mouth is up. As above, so below. If everybody on the same page, like Earth, Wind, and Fire said, our voices will ring as one. It's
all right, thank you, sir. Yeah,
I was going to say, on that note, Maurice White would want me to take the mic. My name is Sherry Culpepper. I am going to keep it quick as I can. I am 4th generation Harlemite. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in Boston, went to Northeast University. I've seen Roxbury, all the communities look just like Harlem. What happened? I grew up, I went away to college, I came back, I had these dreams of helping my family keep our 9 properties that we had systematically. The politicians, I'm a member of SPONY, systematically the politicians have stolen our properties. It is the proverbial elephant in the room everywhere. Let us call it what it is. Let me say this. New York City is, in my opinion, has had disdain for black owners since they took Seneca Village and made it Central Park. Has had disdain for black ownership since they demolished Madam C.J. Walker's home, a double building in Harlem that was built with the finest materials and just demolished after just a few years. And then the Landmark Society said, had the city not demolished her building, it would be a landmark. I am currently in Supreme Court against all the city agencies. My property was deemed, my one family, Brownstone, was deemed an SRO in the 1930s, only occupied by family members. I have 9 people living absolutely free for 10 years. I used to work in radio. 10 years ago, I had to become an operating engineer to take care of these people and to fight HPD, Housing Preservation Development. Housing Preservation Development not only systematically takes care of these people, but they deemed me a slumlord. And no one's ever paid rent. So this goes on. I always say New York City is like a petri dish to see what we can get away with in other areas of this country. And if we get away with it here, it proliferates around the United States. So let's get down to the real problem here. It's economics. It's racial injustice that is perpetuated. And I wish all of you were at the conference right before this one, where the gentleman is talking about the metaverse. We are behind the 8 ball as a people. We are not, in 5 years, we are going to be just names of streets and names of buildings and a thing of the past, just like our brothers and sisters, the Native Americans. So let us do something now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please.
I don't know if you can necessarily speak to this. I'm going to bring a little bit of a different perspective. My name is A. Couture. I am a snack food manufacturer out of Los Angeles, California. So I do own a manufacturing facility, but I'm also the Assistant Western Regional Director for National Action Network. Speaking to Los Angeles and the West Coast in general, a little bit different than what we're dealing with out here in New York State. But I do want to bring a counter question argument. We have NIMBYism in our area. You know, people are very much not in my backyard. These are minority, I hate to say, Black older people who have their houses. They live in View Park. They live in Baldwin Hills. They live in Ladera. They have these beautiful homes. Right at the bottom is Crenshaw. Right at the bottom is Leimert Park. Right at the bottom is Inglewood. And they don't want housing and development. So you have this flux of the projects, which is at the base. Then you have all the homeowners that are at the top. And we're saying, you know, the non-minority developers are coming in and they're building high-rises. But when we say, take your house, sell it to maybe a minority community land trust that can turn it to a 5 or 6 unit complex, put some of your working class young adults, young professionals in those places that can't pay $900,000 for a house, but they're willing to do this, there's that struggle. So my question is, how do we get that balance where we can prevent the NIMBYism, or we can allow younger Black younger minority professionals in general to be able to come in and work their way towards home ownership and still be able to stay in the community and build up the community and not get caught in that flux? And then my second question.
I'm sorry, since we're actually out of time.
Yes, okay. So then my only comment to you about the, how can we get more information on partnering with the organization as a nonprofit organization to help you guys as your initiatives?
Why don't we end with that, if someone can jump in?
Well, when it comes to the NIMBYism, that's where community leadership is so important. And we got to turn to our community institutions and get that leadership to work with the community and the elders in that community to say, hey, we need this. Our young people need housing. Also, our government needs to have the strength to say, okay, we know there's pushback coming from a certain segment of the community, but another segment does need the development. And we're not just seeing it in LA, we're seeing it all over. This idea that we do not want new development. The problem is our population's increasing. Right. So they got to live somewhere. So it's got to come, and so we need that leadership. And then when that housing gets built, it's got to be what we've talked about here. It's got to be mixed use, because what we don't want to do is what Duana talked about, is concentrate poverty. A lot of the fear, particularly in places like in LA, is that if you're going to build, and you're going to build in some of these areas that you're talking about, it's going to end up concentrating things that the folks that got those homes on the hill don't want to have. But we can do better, and it happens with that government partnership, that community leadership, and then a mixed-use development. That's how you move that forward.
Folks, a huge round of thanks to our panel this morning. Councilman Waters, Meredith, Duana, Lincoln, and Jeremy. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And please, I think we'll be here for a little while if we can answer any questions offline.
And those of you who are interested across the hall, our next panel is going to start in about 2 minutes. Reverend Al Sharpton and Michael Eric Dyson in the Metropolitan East Room. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, panelists.